Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into a really interesting topic, plant parenthood.
Plant parenthood.
Yeah, so like how plants care for their young.
Oh, okay.
We're going to be looking at Lessons from Plants by Beronda L. Montgomery.
Oh, cool.
And in it, she talks about how plants actually exhibit agency.
Agency.
Yeah, so like making choices that affect their future.
Huh. I always thought of plants as being, kind of passive.
Me too, totally. But it turns out they're a lot more dynamic than we give them credit for. Montgomery talks about parental care in plants.
Parental care. That's interesting.
Yeah, and one of the coolest examples is this plant called Spigelia genuflexa.
Spaghetti, what now?
Genuflexa.
Okay.
So get this. It buries its own seeds?
Wait, it plants its own seeds?
Yeah, bends its stems down and pushes the seed capsules into the ground.
No way. How did anyone even discover that?
So apparently a handyman in Brazil just stumbled upon it.
Wow, that's amazing. Makes sense though, right? Like,
Well,
protects the seeds from drying out.
totally. Like survival of the fittest, plant edition. It reminds me of peanut plants. You know how they bury their flowers to grow peanuts?
Oh yeah, it's like they're deliberately planting their offspring.
Exactly. And it's not just burying seeds. Some plants regulate the temperature for their baby embryos.
Oh really? How do they do that?
Well, like the narrow-leaf plantain, have you ever seen that? It's a common weed.
Yeah, I think I have.
So it changes the color of its seed spike, like lighter to reflect heat, darker to absorb it.
Whoa, it's like a built-in thermostat.
Right. Crazy. And then there's this whole other thing about seed coats.
Seed coats?
Yeah, some plants modify them, to like prepare their offspring for whatever environment they'll be in.
Like what?
Well, if it's a dry area, the seeds might have a bigger surface area so they can soak up more water. It's like they're giving them a little survival kit.
Wow. So it's not just about protecting them, it's about giving them the skills to thrive.
Exactly. And then, get this, plants can actually pass down survival skills to their offspring, like based on their own experiences. Seriously, how is that possible?
Transgenerational memory.
Trans what?
Transgenerational memory.
Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me.
Basically, it means that the environment a plant lives in can actually change its genes. And those changes can be passed down to its babies.
So it's not just about the genes you're born with. It's about what you experience in your lifetime. Like if your mom was a marathon runner, you might be more likely to be good at running too.
Yeah, exactly. And they've done studies on this, like with wild radishes, if the parent plant gets attacked by caterpillars.
Caterpillars.
Yeah, so the plant starts growing tougher leaves, with little prickles.
Wow, so it's learning to defend itself.
In a way, yeah. And get this, the offspring inherit those tougher leaves, even if they've never seen a caterpillar in their lives.
That's incredible. So it's like the parent plant is teaching its babies how to survive in a dangerous world.
Exactly. And that's where plant agency comes in. This ability to, respond to the environment and shape their future. Okay, hold on. Agency. Are we saying that plants are making conscious choices?
That's where it gets tricky. There's this plant scientist, Sonia Sultan.
Okay.
She's doing some really cool research on this, and she's careful to say it's not about conscious decision-making like we do it.
Okay, that makes sense.
But it is about a remarkable ability to, adapt and change in a way that helps them survive.
So they're not thinking, oh, I need to grow tougher leaves to protect myself from caterpillars. But they are somehow able to respond to the threat and pass that adaptation on to their offspring.
Exactly. Sultan has this really interesting analogy. She compares genes to stage cues in an improv performance.
Oh, I like that.
So the genes are like the basic script, but the environment is like the audience. And the plants are the actors. They respond to the cues based on the audience's reaction.
So it's like the genes are saying, okay, you have the potential to grow tall or short, and then the environment comes in and says, hey, it's really sunny here, you better grow tall to get all that sunlight.
Exactly. And that's what Sultan's research has shown. Plants can adapt their bodies to different environments in crazy ways.
Give me some examples. Like what kind of adaptations are we talking about?
Well, leaf size is one. If a plant is in low light, it might grow bigger leaves to catch more sun.
Makes sense. What about roots?
Oh, roots are super adaptable. Like in really wet soil, a plant might grow roots near the surface to get more oxygen.
Right, because the waterlogged soil would make it hard to breathe otherwise.
Exactly. And then in drought conditions, they might grow these deep, thin roots to search for water.
Wow, so they're really actively responding to their environment. It's not just random chance.
Totally. And these adaptations aren't just temporary either. Sultan's research has shown that plants can pass these traits down to their offspring.
Wait, so if a plant experiences drought, its kids will be better equipped to handle drought, even if they've never experienced it themselves.
That's what her research suggests. It's like the parent plant is giving its offspring a head start, preparing them for the challenges they might face.
That is absolutely mind-blowing. It really changes the way we think about inheritance. It's not just about our genes, it's about the legacy of our experiences. This is making me think about that emerald green sea slug we were talking about the other day.
The one that basically turns into a plant?
Yeah, it incorporates chloroplasts from algae and then changes its body to look like a leaf. It's crazy.
Totally. It's like science fiction come to life. But what does that have to do with plant agency?
Well, I think it highlights how interconnected organisms are with their environments. We may not undergo transformations as dramatic as the sea slug, but we are shaped by our surroundings too.
So even though we don't turn green and grow leaves, the air we breathe, the food we eat, the stress we experience, all of that is affecting our biology.
Absolutely. Think about the impact of air pollution on human health. Studies have shown that it can affect fetal lung development, and there's even evidence that those impacts can be passed down for generations.
So like the environment our grandparents lived in could be affecting our health today.
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
And it all ties back to epigenetics.
Yeah.
How our environment can actually modify the expression of our genes.
This is all so fascinating. Plant parenthood, transgenerational memory, plant agency. It seems like we're just scratching the surface of what plants are capable of.
And we haven't even gotten to invasive species yet. They're like the poster children for plant agency.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What makes them so special?
Well, according to Sonia Sultan, they're superplastic, meaning they can adapt to all sorts of different environments. They kind of break the traditional rules of ecology.
How so?
Well, usually there's a trade-off between being a specialist, really good at surviving in one specific environment,
Right.
and being a generalist, which means you can survive in lots of different environments, but maybe not as well.
Okay.
But invasive species, they seem to be able to do both.
So they're like the ultimate survivors, but how do they pull that off?
It seems to come down to their incredible ability to adapt and then pass those adaptations down to their kids.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not that they're more aggressive, they're just really good at making the most of their situation.
Exactly. And that's what makes them so successful in invading new territories. They're constantly evolving and fine-tuning their bodies to take advantage of the conditions.
So instead of seeing them as invaders, maybe we should think of them as the ultimate adapters.
I like that. It's a much more nuanced way of looking at it.
Okay, so we've got this idea that invasive species are masters of adaptation.
Yeah.
Is there a specific example that comes to mind, like a plant that really embodies this whole concept of plant agency?
Well, there's one that's pretty notorious. You've probably seen it yourself. Japanese knotweed.
Japanese knotweed. Oh, yeah, I've seen that stuff growing everywhere. It looks like it could push through concrete.
It pretty much can. It's incredibly aggressive. It spreads through these underground stems called rhizomes, forming massive networks that are almost impossible to get rid of.
No kidding. So it's not just taking advantage of cracks, it's creating them.
Exactly. That's what makes it such a nightmare to control. You think you've removed it all, but then just a tiny piece of rhizome left behind can sprout a whole new plant.
Talk about resilient. It almost seems intentional. Like it's actively seeking out those weak points and exploiting them.
It's easy to anthropomorphize, I know. But the reality is, Japanese knotweed doesn't have a conscious plan.
Okay.
But it has evolved this incredible ability to adapt and respond to its environment.
Right, right. So back to this superplasticity thing. How did Japanese knotweed get to be so invasive? It wasn't always like this, right?
You're right. Believe it or not, it was originally brought over here as an ornamental plant in the 1800s.
What? People actually planted this stuff on purpose.
They did. It was valued for its fast growth and dense foliage. It made a great privacy screen.
Wow. But then what happened?
Well, over time, it seems to have evolved and adapted, becoming more and more invasive. It's like it learned how to exploit its new environment and just took off.
And that's what we see today, this plant that's taken over so many areas. Okay, so it grows fast. What else makes it so successful?
Well, that fast growth allows it to shade out other plants, hog all the sunlight.
Right.
And it also helps it colonize new areas quickly. Those rhizomes just spread out underground and pop up new shoots everywhere.
It's like a plant world, Billy. But seriously, what are the consequences of this kind of aggressive growth?
Well, ecologically speaking, it can be a real problem. It can crowd out native plants, which reduces biodiversity, and changes whole ecosystems.
So it's not just about plants, it's about the whole web of life.
Exactly. And then there are the economic impacts. Japanese knotweed can damage foundations, pavements, even sewer systems.
Yikes. So it's not just an ecological problem, it's a real economic headache, too.
It is. And it's a prime example of why invasive species are taken so seriously. They can have far-reaching consequences.
So we've got this plant that's super adaptable, super aggressive, and super hard to get rid of.
Right.
What do we do about it? Can we even stop it?
That's the million-dollar question. There are control methods out there, but knotweed is notoriously difficult to eradicate.
So what are our options?
Well, herbicides can be effective, but they often need to be applied repeatedly, over several years. And even then,
It might not work.
it might come back. And of course, there are environmental concerns with using herbicides.
Right, of course. So what else can we do? Pull it up.
You can try mechanical removal, but it's incredibly labor-intensive.
Yeah, I bet. Those rhizomes are tough.
They are. And you have to make sure you get every single bit, otherwise it'll just grow back.
This is starting to sound pretty hopeless.
Well, don't despair. Understanding plant agency can actually help us develop more effective strategies for managing invasive species.
So instead of just trying to kill it, we need to, outsmart it.
Exactly. We need to learn more about its strengths and weaknesses and figure out how to use those to our advantage.
Okay, so understanding plant agency can help us fight invasive species. But are there any other, benefits to this kind of research?
Oh, absolutely. This research could have huge implications for agriculture, for conservation,
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
and even for medicine.
Medicine, really?
Think back to that study we talked about with the lung cancer gene and how eating broccoli could actually counter its effects.
Oh, right. That was fascinating.
Well, that's a perfect example of how understanding the relationship between genes and the environment can lead to new ways of preventing and treating diseases.
So we're not just talking about managing plants, we're talking about potentially improving human health.
Exactly. And that's what I love about science. Discoveries in one area can often have totally unexpected applications in other fields.
I'm totally blown away. Plants are way more complex and adaptable than I ever imagined.
And we're just getting started. There's still so much we're learning about the plant world.
It's a whole new world of possibilities.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Plant parenthood, plant agency, invasive species, even potential medical applications.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. So what's the big takeaway? What's the one thing you want our listeners to remember from our conversation?
I think the most important thing is that we need to change how we think about plants.
In what way?
They're not just passive organisms. They're active agents in their own lives, and they play a huge role in shaping the world around us.
I love that. Plants as active agents. But what does that mean for us? For humans, how should this change the way we interact with plants?
I think it calls for a deeper level of respect and understanding.
Okay.
We need to recognize that plants are complex beings with their own unique ways of experiencing and responding to the world.
And maybe we can learn from them. Their resilience, their adaptability, their ability to thrive in challenging conditions.
Absolutely. Plants have a lot to teach us about living in harmony with our environment.
This whole conversation has been a real eye-opener for me. I feel like I'm seeing the plant world in a whole new light.
And that's the power of scientific inquiry. It challenges our assumptions and expands our understanding of the world around us.
Okay, so for our listeners out there, what's one thing you hope they take away from our discussion today? What's the most important message you want to leave them with?
I want them to walk away with a sense of wonder and respect for the plants around them. I encourage them to really observe the subtle ways that plants respond to their environment. They're not just decorations. They're living beings with their own stories to tell.
I love that. And I would add that I hope they also consider the ways that their own environment shapes them. The air we breathe, the food we eat, the stresses we experience.
Right.
All of that can have a huge impact, not just on us, but on future generations.
Beautifully put. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up our deep dive into plant agency.
It's been an incredible journey. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
The pleasure was all mine. And for our listeners, until next time, keep diving deep and never stop asking questions. There's always more to discover.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of plant parenthood and agency. We hope you've learned something new today, and that you'll look at the plants around you with a newfound appreciation for their complexity and resilience. Thanks for joining us. It's like we've been totally blind to this whole other dimension of the plant world.
It's true. We often impose our own ideas of intelligence and awareness onto other organisms, and I think that's limited our understanding.
Yeah, totally. So Sonia Sultan's work is really groundbreaking. It's like she's giving us this whole new framework for understanding plants.
I think she's opening up a whole new field of study, really.
It makes you wonder what else we've been missing, right? What other amazing things are plants capable of that we just haven't figured out yet?
Exactly. That's what I find so exciting about this research. It's like we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what we can learn from plants.
Okay, well, I have to admit, my mind is pretty blown right now.
Mine too.
So before we move on, I think we need to just take a moment to appreciate the incredible world of plants, all these adaptations and strategies they've developed to survive and thrive.
I agree. They're all around us, these silent but powerful beings shaping our world in ways we're only just beginning to understand.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that this research on plant agency could help us figure out how to help plants adapt to climate change.
Right.
Can you say more about that? Like, how would that actually work?
Well, think about it this way. Climate change is putting a lot of struggle on plant populations.
Yeah, for sure. Rising temperatures, changes in rainfall, extreme weather events. It's tough out there.
Right. And not all plants are going to be able to keep up with those changes.
Okay.
But within any given species, there's going to be some variation, right? Some individuals are going to be more adaptable than others.
So, like, some will have the genes that help them cope with drought or extreme heat?
Exactly. And by understanding plant agency, we can identify those individuals, those genotypes, that are most likely to survive and thrive in a changing climate.
And then what? We plant more of them.
That's one approach. We can focus on protecting those populations and propagating those individuals. It's like giving them a head start.
So instead of just trying to conserve every plant, we're targeting those that have the best chance of adapting.
Exactly. It's a more targeted, more strategic approach to conservation.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's not like we're talking about genetically modifying plants here, right?
Right. We're not messing with their genes. We're simply working with the natural variation that already exists and helping those individuals that are best suited to the changing conditions to succeed.
So we're not playing God. We're just giving a little nudge in the right direction.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of protecting plant diversity.
Right, because the more diversity we have, the more options we have for adapting to change.
Exactly. It's like having a bigger toolbox. The more tools you have, the better equipped you are to handle whatever challenges come your way.
And this isn't just about saving plants for their own sake, right?
Bro.
It's about saving ourselves, too. We depend on plants for so many things. Food, oxygen, medicine.
Right. Plants are literally the foundation of life on Earth. And by understanding and supporting their agency, we're not just preserving biodiversity, we're ensuring our own survival as a species.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. We're all interconnected, aren't we? The fate of plants is intertwined with our own fate.
We are. And I think that's a key takeaway from our conversation today. We need to move beyond this human-centric view of the world and recognize that we're just one part of a much larger, more complex web of life.
This whole deep dive has really been eye-opening for me.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's like I'm seeing the plant world in a whole new light. And it's making me think about our own relationship with the environment in a new way, too.
That's great. That's exactly what I was hoping for.
Okay, so before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's one thing you'd like to leave our listeners with? What's the most important message you want them to take away?
I want them to go outside, look at the plants around them with fresh eyes, and appreciate the incredible complexity and resilience of the plant world. They're not just passive bystanders. They're active agents, shaping their own destinies and shaping our world in the process.
I love that. And I would add that I hope our listeners also think about the ways their own environment is shaping them. The air we breathe, the food we eat, the stress we experience, all of those things can have a profound impact.
Yes, and those impacts can even be passed down to future generations. So it's not just about us. It's about our children and grandchildren and the legacy we leave behind.
Wow. That's a sobering thought, but also a hopeful one, because it means that we have the power to make positive changes that will benefit generations to come.
Exactly. We're not just passengers on this planet. We're active participants, and our choices matter.
Okay, well, on that note, I think we need to take a quick break. But when we come back, I want to delve a little deeper into this idea of how we can use our understanding of plant agency to help plants adapt to the challenges of climate change.
You know, it's funny. I've always thought of myself as a plant person.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, like I have plants all over my house.
Mm-hmm.
But after learning all this stuff about plant agency, I feel like I'm seeing them totally differently.
How so?
Well, I used to think of them as just these, pretty things,
Yeah.
just adding some greenery to my space.
Right.
But now I realize there's so much more than that.
They're not just decorations.
No, they're like constantly sensing and responding to their environment. They're adapting. They're making choices.
They're shaping their own futures.
Right. It's kind of humbling, actually.
It is. We tend to think of intelligence and agency as being like human qualities.
Right.
But the plant world is full of examples that challenge those assumptions. Totally. And I think this whole new understanding of plants opens up so many possibilities, not just for how we relate to them, but for things like agriculture, conservation,
Yeah,
even medicine.
exactly. And that reminds me of something we talked about earlier, about how some plants modify their seed coats to give their offspring a better chance of survival.
Yeah, like equipping them with special tools for different environments.
Oh, right. Well, what if we could use that same principle to help plants adapt to climate change?
Whoa, that's interesting. How would that work?
Well, it's still pretty early days in this kind of research.
Okay.
But the idea is we could figure out which genes control those seed coat adaptations
Uh-huh.
and then use that knowledge to, like, breed or engineer plants that are better equipped to handle drought or extreme temperatures.
So we're basically giving them a genetic boost to help them adapt to climate change.
Kind of. But it's different from traditional genetic modification. We're not adding genes from other species.
Okay.
We're just enhancing the adaptations that already exist within the plant's own genome.
So it's more like we're helping them speed up their natural evolution.
That's a great way to put it. It's a reminder that nature often has the solutions to our problems. We just need to pay attention.
And that brings us back to the importance of plant diversity.
Right.
The more diversity we have, the more chances we have that some plants will have the traits that will help them survive these changes.
Exactly. It's like having a bigger safety net.
So protecting biodiversity is about way more than just saving pretty plants.
Yeah. It's about ensuring our own survival as a species.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of plants,
Yeah.
what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I'd encourage everyone to go outside and look at the plants around them with new eyes.
Okay.
Think about the challenges they face, the adaptations they've developed, the stories they hold. There's so much to learn and appreciate.
I love that. And I would add, pay attention to your own relationship with the environment. Think about how your choices affect the world around you and how those choices might ripple out to affect future generations.
That's beautiful. I think that sums it up perfectly. It's been such a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
Me too. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of plant parenthood and agency. We hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as we have. And until next time, keep exploring and keep asking questions. There's a whole world of